I was married off to a blind man, someone I despised. Whenever he felt like coming closer, I would have him sleep with the maid while I sat there and watched. I never knew that he could feel everything and that he was fully aware he was with the maid. This story is something to watch alone. But before continuing, I want to know if you liked our previous video. If so, write yes in the comments and subscribe to our channel for more wisdom-filled content. I was burning with anger. I didn't know where to go or what to do. My family had treated me unjustly by marrying me off to a blind man. A man who couldn't even see the world or go anywhere on his own. They made him my life partner. They got the money they needed, but what about me? I was left without any options, no clear path ahead. As I sat seething, I suddenly heard a knock at the door. Moments later he came in, accompanied by the male nurse who was always with him. The nurse settled him in the room and then stepped outside saying, "If you need anything or run into any trouble, just call me. I'll be in the next room." I forced a nod, wiping away my tears, and my husband sat down beside me. Using his hands, he began to feel the contours of my face. A wave of rage coursed through me. I pushed his hand away, startling him. He hadn't expected this reaction. Maybe he thought I was a poor girl, dazzled by his wealth, who would never dare to reject him. But I couldn't stand to have him near me. He tried making small talk, asking about my likes and dislikes, but I could hardly hear him. My mind was spinning, wondering how I could rid myself of this man. Amjad's face kept flashing before my eyes, and then an idea struck me. I quickly told him, "I'll be back shortly after changing. These heavy clothes are making me so tired." I helped him lie down on the bed, went into the dressing room to change, and then quietly slipped out of the room. I didn't know where to start looking for the maid who lived here permanently. When I first arrived, she had shared a long story about her struggles. I was thinking that maybe I could use her situation to my advantage. As I stepped into the lounge, I saw the guard outside and walked over. Seeing me, he looked surprised and asked, "Madam, what are you doing out here at this hour? Do you need something?" I told him, "I need to speak with Shabo. Can you call her?" The guard fetched her, and she arrived looking sleepy and confused. "Did you need something, madam?" she asked. Taking her hand, I led her into the lounge and placed a valuable gold ring in her palm. It was one of the pieces of jewelry my husband had sent with the wedding gifts, a ring I had liked very much. But what I was about to do felt more important than keeping my favorite piece of jewelry. I told Shabo, "I need you to do something for me. If you help me, I'll give you even more money. You mentioned your daughter is sick and you need money for her treatment. If you help me, I'll pay for her treatment and cover all your other needs." Shabo stared at me in shock. When I told her this, she was stunned. Then she began clutching her ears, saying, "Madam, if my husband finds out, who knows what will happen? Please don't do this." But I grabbed her by the arms and shook her, firmly stating, "Then I'll accuse you of theft and have you thrown out of the house." She stared at me wide-eyed, knowing she had no choice but to comply. With her head bowed, she followed me into the room. I had her lie on the bed in my place and then left the room. About an hour later, she emerged looking utterly defeated. A wave of satisfaction coursed through me as I thanked her. She avoided meeting my gaze and left. She was poor but not without self-respect. It was her circumstances that forced her into this. When I returned to the room, my husband was sound asleep. I lay down as well, thinking how my quick thinking had saved me. I simply couldn't bear him. He spoke so kindly, cared for me deeply, loved me immensely, but I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of repulsion. My parents' betrayal, their selling me off for money, had left me unable to bring myself to speak to them. Even the thought of returning to them was unthinkable. But one day my mother came unannounced, tearfully embracing me, scolding me for not visiting even once. Her words softened my heart. Seeing my mother cry broke down some of the walls I had built. My husband, seeing her upset, suggested I stay with her for a while. And so, reluctantly, I went back to my parents. During that visit I ran into Amjad. Seeing him again rekindled old feelings. He, too, looked at me with a mix of regret and sadness before returning to his task, flying a kite on the rooftop. For a long while I tried to ignore him, but eventually I couldn't help myself. I spoke to him. Hearing the pain in his voice, I realized he was suffering deeply. But I was suffering more. None of this had been my fault. As I stared at his face, a sinister thought crossed my mind, one that I couldn't shake. I started to wonder how I could bring that thought to fruition. When I returned home, I began laying the groundwork for my plan. The maid, bound by her circumstances, had no choice but to keep my secrets. On her end, I felt assured she wouldn't speak a word. But then there was Safter, my husband's secretary. His trusted confidant. He always shared everything with my husband, and I knew I needed to remove him from the picture. I hatched a plan. Late one night, I called him to the room, pretending my husband wasn't feeling well. He rushed in without hesitation. The moment he stepped in, I began screaming. My husband, startled, sat up in alarm, asking what had happened. Through my tears, I accused Safter of trying to harass me. Safter, stunned, tried desperately to defend himself, but my husband only heard what I told him, only saw what I made him see. He promptly fired Safter. No amount of pleading or attempts to prove his innocence could change the outcome. Now, with Safter out of the way, I moved on to the next part of my carefully laid plan. I told my husband about a distant cousin of mine. When I shared this idea with him, he was taken aback but finally agreed. "If you say so, then it must be a good idea," he said. "After all, no one knows better than you what's best for me." His words momentarily filled me with a sense of guilt. I was deeply aware of how I was deceiving him, while he spoke of his trust in me with such genuine affection. But I quickly shoved that feeling aside. I had already set my plan in motion. Soon after, I arranged for Amjad to move into our home. He took over the responsibilities left by Safter, and, to my satisfaction, agreed to the arrangement without hesitation. The house was large, and Amjad settled in easily. Not only did he find comfort and security here, but he also had me close at hand. Both of us were content, moving forward with our hidden agenda. I continued to summon the maid into my room while I slipped away to spend time with Amjad in his quarters. Everything was running according to my wishes. Then, one day, my husband announced his plans to travel abroad for business. I was startled at the thought. If he left, Amjad would undoubtedly go with him, and how would I cope without Amjad? I casually inquired who would accompany him on the trip. To my relief, he mentioned that a friend of his would join him to help out. His answer put me at ease, and I gave my approval without hesitation. With my husband away, I spent the month indulging in luxury. Using his money, Amjad and I ventured to places I'd never dreamed of visiting. We explored every corner of Pakistan, soaking in experiences I'd never thought possible. That month was a whirlwind of joy and excitement, a treasure trove of moments we enjoyed to the fullest. But when my husband returned, something about him was different. His demeanor was composed, yet his presence felt heavier. He appeared healthier, and his expression carried a newfound seriousness. That night, as always, I called the maid to my room and went to Amjad's quarters. But I'd barely settled there when the door suddenly opened, the lights switched on, and as I turned around to see who it was, I found myself jolted awake from my thoughts. Memories of my childhood came flooding back, and I was reminded of the harsh realities I'd grown up with. Poverty was a constant companion in our household. We lived in a cramped home, my parents, my siblings, and I. I was the eldest, shouldering the bulk of household chores while my younger siblings enjoyed some leniency. My mother's scoldings were a daily routine. She found fault in everything I did, visiting friends, spending time on the rooftop, and countless other things. It often felt like she didn't love us, like she had only brought us into the world out of obligation. I never dared voice these thoughts. My mother's anger was swift, and her slipper was always within reach. My father's earnings barely covered the essentials. With 2 little brothers and a household to feed, meals were often simple and repetitive: lentils and vegetables. Rarely did we have anything more substantial. Sometimes we went hungry for days. Amid this bleak existence, Amjad entered my life like a breath of fresh air. His family had recently moved into our neighborhood, and when I told her my decision, she was utterly shocked. She pressed her hands to her ears, muttering, "I can't believe this. What will happen if my husband finds out?" But I grabbed her by the arms, shook her, and said, "If you refuse, I'll accuse you of theft and have you thrown out of the house." She stared at me, wide-eyed and speechless. With no other options, she finally gave in. Reluctantly, she followed me back to the room. I had her lie on the bed, then slipped out of the room. About an hour later, she emerged, looking defeated. I felt a surge of triumph. I thanked her, and she quietly left, her head lowered in shame. She was poor, not without dignity, but her circumstances forced her into this role. When I returned to the room, my husband was asleep. I lay down, letting my thoughts wander. In a strange way, I was satisfied. Things had gone according to plan. My husband was kind and loving. He always spoke gently, asked about my likes and dislikes, and genuinely cared for me. Yet I couldn't bring myself to reciprocate. His touch, his presence, everything about him repulsed me. I knew my parents had forced me into this marriage for financial reasons. They decided that the wealth my husband offered outweighed any objections I might have had. But now, the very wealth that had bought my silence became a means of rebellion. I began to orchestrate a life that suited me, and my husband remained none the wiser. One day my mother came to visit, tears streaming down her face. She hugged me tightly, saying, "Why haven't you visited us? We've missed you so much." Her words melted some of my bitterness, and I allowed myself to feel a moment of softness. My husband, always eager to please me, suggested, "Why don't you spend a few days with them?" Reluctantly, I agreed and went home with my mother. It was during this visit that I saw Amjad again. Just seeing his face brought back a flood of old feelings. He stood on the roof, flying a kite, pretending not to notice me. I tried to ignore him, but the memories were too strong. Finally, I gave in and spoke to him. His words were heavy with hurt and disappointment. In that moment, I felt justified in my choices. I hadn't abandoned him. I'd been forced away from him. That evening, back in my husband's home, I felt emboldened to move forward with my plans. I involved the maid, who had little choice but to obey, and I managed to replace my husband's loyal caretaker, Safter, with Amjad. I was careful, calculating. I made sure my husband remained in the dark, and before long, my scheme was in full swing. Amjad moved into the house, took over Safter's duties, and we were free to be together under the same roof. For a month we lived comfortably. Amjad had everything he needed: comfort, security, and most importantly, me. I took my husband's money and used it to create a life of luxury with Amjad. We traveled, dined, and enjoyed ourselves in ways I'd never imagined. It was a dreamlike existence, made possible by a man who couldn't see my betrayal. But then one day my husband returned from his trip. I noticed something different about him. He looked healthier, more confident, and there was a new seriousness in his demeanor. That night, as usual, I summoned the maid to my room, then went to Amjad's quarters. But as I settled into Amjad's room, the door suddenly burst open, the lights flicked on, and I turned to see. When the lights came on, we were startled and quickly sat up. My husband stood in the doorway, staring straight ahead. My breath caught, but then I remembered he was blind, and relief washed over me. He stood there silently for what felt like an eternity. Thinking he couldn't see anything, we resumed what we were doing, ignoring him. Eventually, he closed the door and left without saying a word. His blindness had become a convenience, and I thought it would allow me to continue living the way I wanted. The next morning I went down to the breakfast table, only to be stunned by what I saw. My husband was sitting there, calmly reading a newspaper. He wore glasses, his eyes fixed on the page. I exchanged a panicked glance with Amjad. What was happening? My husband looked at me and said, I forgot to share some good news with you. I went abroad to have my eyes treated. The operation was a success, and my vision has been restored. I felt my world collapsing. I thought back to the previous night. He had seen everything. My heart pounded in my chest. He saw the betrayal, and now he knew the truth. He stared at me, his expression filled with quiet pain. I trusted you. I loved you, he said. But something didn't sit right with me when you accused Safter of misconduct. I wanted to believe you, but his words made me question everything. He told me you were lying, that you had some other motive. I didn't want to believe him. I decided to find out the truth for myself. When I returned home, I started noticing things. I noticed the way you behaved. When you sent the maid to my room last night, I could see what was going on. At first, the maid thought I was still blind. But when I confronted her, she broke down in tears. She confessed it all. She said she was forced to do it. She said she was too scared to say no. His voice grew heavier. When I came to the other room, I saw everything with my own eyes. I didn't want to believe it, but there it was. The truth was undeniable. He handed me an envelope. Here are your divorce papers. You're free from this marriage. Could only stare, frozen. He didn't give me a chance to explain, to beg for forgiveness. Then he handed me another envelope. This is the deed to an apartment I bought for you. It was meant to be a gift for you, but now I'm giving it to you so you can start your new life. You're free to live however you choose. My husband's words cut me deeply, and though I knew I had betrayed him, his calm, controlled manner made the whole thing even more painful. I took the documents and left. At least I had the apartment, a place to live. I also took whatever money and jewelry I had. It would be enough for the short term. Amjad and I moved into the apartment. Once my iddah was completed, I pressed Amjad to marry me, and he agreed. We got married, but the life we had once imagined was far from reality. Amjad stayed home all day. The money and jewelry started running out. Slowly, the reality of my choices began to set in. I began to grow increasingly frustrated. Morning and night I would tell Amjad to find work, to do something, to stop lying around the house. Each time I brought it up, he would brush me off with a sweet smile, but now my patience was at its limit. When I pressed him in anger, he started hitting me. Any mention of a job sent him into a rage, and he would lash out. He was completely useless. He had no drive, no skills, and no willingness to work. My mother had been right all along. The only things Amjad was good for were loafing around and sweet-talking. Those same qualities that once made me fall for him were now the reason I was trapped in this miserable situation. My parents were angry with me. They didn't want anything to do with me anymore. And here I was, living in regret, bitterness, and exhaustion. I had no education beyond 10th grade, which meant finding a decent job was impossible. Desperate, I took a job in a factory. I worked from morning till evening, and when I got home, I would find Amjad lounging on the bed, glued to the TV. Seeing him like that made my blood boil. Exhausted from a full day's labor, I still had to do all the housework. Tears streamed down my face as memories of my former life flooded back. I thought of the comfort and ease I had once enjoyed with my ex-husband. Back then I had everything I could ever want. Now those days felt like a distant dream. My mistakes and sins had led me to this hellish, humiliating existence. When I went to see my mother, she wouldn't even look at me. Her face turned away, and I left her house in tears. Every day felt like a nightmare, a cycle of work and regret. If only I had listened to my mother's advice. If only I had shown patience and given my first husband love and respect. She had told me he'd get better after his operation, but I was too consumed by my hatred and resentment to believe her. If I had stayed, I would have been living a comfortable, peaceful life by now. He had regained his sight and was leading a good life. But I had thrown it all away. My mother always said I was impulsive, and she was right. That impulsiveness left me with no options. Amjad knew I had no other place to go. He knew every door was closed to me now. I had no choice but to make the best of it. This was my life now. Waking up each day to the same grinding cycle of work, coming home to a man who contributed nothing, and carrying the burden of my own mistakes. For women like me, there's no escape, only the bitter lessons we have to live with every day.